Hi there, stay tuned and I'll be sharing with you my testimony. To give you some context about the woman that you see sitting here today, I was born and raised in an urban town in New Jersey, where shortly afterwards my parents were divorced. We went through a grueling custody battle where I was only allowed to see my father for 2 hours on Thursdays and twice a month for a sleepover. Holidays were regulated, and it's not the traditional way that a family runs. So as a child, I always had that feeling of I wanted that happily ever after. I wanted my parents to be together. My parents had other boyfriends and girlfriends after they split, and unfortunately, during one of my parents' relationships, I was exposed to adult behavior. So while I'm on that note, I'm going to say, please make sure you flip a channel immediately if there's anything that is adult behavior when there's a child in a room, because even though you think they might not understand what they're seeing, it will scar them. Back to the testimony. I was in a headspace where I really shouldn't have been as a young child. I was suicidal as a child because I was so upset about my parents not being together. And it really fueled this sort of like victim mentality. Why does this happen to me? And knowing about my parents were bounced back and forth between New York and Puerto Rico during their childhoods. They were bullied for being, when they were in the States, they were bullied for being the Puerto Ricans, and when they were back in Puerto Rico, they were made fun of for being the gringo Puerto Ricans. So my parents were bullied, and that was during their school years. That does not account for the fact that my father was orphaned at a young age and went through homelessness as well as horrible trauma that I will not expose without him here. And my mom, she dealt with child abuse, like physical child abuse. I love my grandma, but it was a different time back then, and I suppose people knew a lot less about child psychology and how they will never forget what happens to them, basically. Some people block stuff out. A lot of other people will carry things with them, especially if they don't know how to deal with them. So now, in terms of the faith that was circulating in my area, my grandmother was a Catholic. My father had some biblical background, but because of the previously mentioned suffering that he endured, he had a perspective on God, or an attitude with God, like, how could you allow so much suffering in my life? He didn't have a father that was around ever, and his mom died when he was very young, and then he lived with a very strict, stern, no nonsense grandmother for a little while before being homeless and living in the streets of New York City. So my dad was not very happy with God for a good chunk of my life. And so in addition to hearing about my dad's suffering, which at the time he didn't tell me all of the things he had gone through because he thought that I wasn't ready for it. He thought that that's not where my mind should be. And thinking about it now, I'm so grateful that he didn't tell me what he went through back then. All the time he was telling me to protect myself. All the time he was telling me to be careful. He said, I'll tell you one day, but I will not, because you don't need to be thinking about these things. So I'm grateful for that, Dad, truly. So fast forward, I don't have a relationship with God. I only pray when I am afraid, or when I need something, when someone is dying in the hospital. Even Christmas and Easter, I didn't have a particular attachment to. What struck me early in life, or as a young one, was the movie The Passion of the Christ, directed by Mel Gibson, with Jim Caviezel. If you've not seen The Passion of the Christ, it is a phenomenal movie to show you the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's phenomenal to show you what Jesus endured, the torture that he endured for the atonement of his people, for people to be rectified with God, so that we could have an eternal life with God. I remember that movie making such a big impact on me because of the scene where he is being tortured before carrying the cross to the crucifixion site. And I remember as a kid just feeling so heartbroken, seeing Jesus be tortured and whipped and blasphemed. And that, it always stuck with me. I'll just pause there, but that always stuck with me. So, fast forward into my adolescence, I don't have a relationship with God. I don't have guidance really pushing me in the direction of God, just my parents telling me not to be angry with God. I remember my mom for a while, for a few years, was very adamant about trying to get me to not be angry with God. And then later, a few years later, my father actually turned to God and started watching Bible movies and movies about Jesus, and that was a really critical time because he was going through things. He was an adult. I was already in college at this time, and he was going through things, and he started watching those movies, and then so in turn I was spending time with him watching some of those movies as well. And a lot of the time I was like fighting internally, like I didn't really want to watch the movies, I didn't want to learn about it, and I would lie and say, oh Dad, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, my relationship with God is just between me and God, like don't worry about it, you don't have to correct me, you don't have to coach me, just leave me alone about it and I'll sort it out. And looking back at it now, I regret having that, I regret saying those things. I wish that I fought more to one, it would have been a good opportunity for me to spend time with my dad, and two, I would have been learning more. But for a while, I just completely disregarded it. I told my dad, basically I said, mind your business. I did not want to have a relationship with God, or I said that I was working on it just by myself, which I wasn't. So fast forward, I learn early not early in adolescence, but junior year in high school, I learn about intimacy, and I'm surrounded by a cohort of other city kids that must have had so much more exposure to adult behavior and unfortunately the pornography industry, because I don't think their parents were watching them. I'll show that we need parents to be more involved, because what are your kids talking about when they're all congregating? Adult behavior? These magazines and these sites have been around for as long as the digital, world has been accessible to youth. It's something they may come across, and the digital age was very prominent in my childhood. This is when all these computers started to really take off, and everybody had access to a personal computer. A lot of my classmates had personal computers, and so they were a lot more advanced than I was, if you know what I'm saying. But I didn't seek pleasure in those things. I didn't find pleasure in those things. Anyway, let's get back on track. So throughout my life, I was just constantly encountering people pointing me in the wrong direction. There were also people pointing me towards Jesus, towards God. So fast forward to my adulthood, okay? Well, I guess let's go back to adolescence. I start dating a Christian guy. I tell him, listen, I'm not a Christian. I have no intention of converting, so please don't try to drag me to church and convert me. And what did he say? He said, girl, I shouldn't even be dating you if you're not Christian, which I want to applaud that young man back then. I want to applaud him because that is exactly correct. You should not, if you are a Christian, if you believe in Jesus Christ and every high standard he held us all to, should not be dating somebody that does not have the same faith in God that you do. Back to the topic. I told the guy I didn't want to have anything to do with God. Eventually, he led me to church, which seemed like it was just motivational speaking, to be honest. It was a Spanish church, and everything they were saying was nice. It was really nice. Nothing wrong with it. They would take a Bible verse and then they would expand on it, kind of relate it to today, make it motivational. But I really didn't feel the Holy Spirit there, and I did not feel it in a lot of churches that I went to. I felt the Holy Spirit when I was all alone by myself in a house, just all alone by myself. I will get there. So through my life of making horrible decisions because I was, I guess, seeking validation from others, and I was depressed, just filling myself with nonsense activities and just being a people pleaser, doing, just whatever plans other people wanted to do. I was just, I'll go. Sometimes I couldn't go because my parents were strict, but then that's where lying came in and horrible rebellious behavior, in which I am so glad to be alive today, because some of the things and places that I was going with my friends were not safe at all. And they were very high risk situations. So fast forward to when I am at my lowest point, okay? I had seen a lot of suffering up until this point, and I had also experienced a lot of suffering. And I am a very deep feeler. I have deep empathy, and oftentimes when people are going through things, they come to me, they want to unload on me. Sometimes they want advice, sometimes they don't. But I have always taken it onto my shoulders and been squished, if you will, because I just start to feel like I cannot help them. And I'm sure maybe, that's something that you've gone through too. Your friends come to you and you want to help them, but you just don't know how. So there was a lot on my shoulders, a lot on my plate, mental fog and feelings of death and very near death, suicidal thoughts, just anything to run away from this life. And later on, I'll break it down into sections of what all I went through that brought me to Christ. Because you can see me here, the background looks nice, my glasses are cute, maybe, I don't know. And you might think, well, this girl looks peppy. She probably has had it good her whole life, and now she's preaching Jesus. But you know what? I've not always been this peppy and this excited for life. I'm telling you from the truest corners of my heart. I was in shambles in every sense of the word, and I was a failure in so many areas because I was just trying to have control of my own life, and I was not surrendered to God. I did not hold myself to any high standard at all. So I ran away. I had constant thoughts of suicide. And finally, so sidebar. My dad and I, and even my mom and my sister, we're big movie buffs, big TV buffs. You know, we grew up a little bit. Sometimes we had dinner in front of the TV. All right, sue us, okay? The point is that we connect over film, right? And something that came naturally in the progression of the digital age is watching Netflix together, right? So me and my dad would binge watch these TV shows, and at this pivotal time in my life, I came home from out of state, my running away scenario. I came home and my dad was watching a new show. So I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna watch this new show with my dad. And what is it? It's Grey's Anatomy. And I had seen Grey's Anatomy bits and pieces, like trailers or commercials here and there, but I never had the time or really the inspiration to watch Grey's Anatomy. It just didn't align with my schedule. So I finally start watching it with my dad. I have no idea how good the writing is, the drama, the character performances. I just didn't know. By the time I get to season 3, I am back out of state. I was in Texas at the time. And I am home alone watching the episode where the main character is dead, unconscious, because she drowned in a Puget Sound in Washington. So the issue here is that she has a background in swimming. So for her to die by drowning is a bit suspicious. So what happens? She enters this mental or soul limbo, and she encounters characters that previously died, and we had seen episodes of these characters be on the show and die horrible deaths, and they're there telling her and asking her, you have been taking your life for granted. Why would you let yourself die? There are people that die every single day too early who had goals to really help humanity and do these incredible things. So why do you feel like you can't get through your problems? You know, why are you taking your life for granted? In that moment, I instantly felt like it was talking to me. My heart was pierced. My mind, I was like a mind, like, you know, you think of like mind blown, mind explosion. That's what happened to me, because something that I had never thought about suicide popped into my head. And it was, if I decided to commit suicide and changed my mind, I could not come back. This is something that was never in my mind before. It was just, how do I do it? How do I do it? When do I do it? How do I do it? I'm sure it's going to make everything easier for everybody else, which is a lie. The Lord spoke to me. The Lord, again, pierced my heart and my mind and my soul and convicted me. And I was home alone. I just went on my knees and I did the sinner's prayer. I just wanted to grieve to the Lord, beg for forgiveness, and beg that Jesus come into my life and into my heart, because I was not living on a straight and narrow path. I was all over the place, constantly making poor decisions with relationships, with family, with friends, with jobs, every area you can think of, with my own personal health. Everything was like a failure. And now I had asked the Lord to come into my heart. And in that moment, after I was sobbing and weeping and just like letting all of this out and just begging the Lord to let me live, that if I could please live, I want to live now. That's the moment that changed everything. I felt this immediate weight off of my shoulders. And it might sound funny, but outside the colors looked different. The clouds looked more defined. I started to look up testimony videos, and I saw that I was not the only one that's had this experience. There are tons of people who have gone through suffering and terrible, terrible circumstances, and they found God. I started just going on YouTube, looking for testimonies and just trying to see, wow, these people are sharing the gospel. I would love to do that. So it took a while. It took a little bit of work. I had to leave that situation once I decided to let Christ into my heart and really accept him. I had to leave the situation that I was in. I moved. I left Texas. I came back home, which I did not handle it the best way at the time. I wasn't sure what to do, how to handle it, and I am sorry for the people that I hurt on my way back to New Jersey. And I'm sorry for everybody that I've hurt before, everybody that I've hurt throughout my entire life, because I was a mess. Before God, I was a mess. And even after God, I am not perfect. So I'm grateful for, any relationship that we have, because I have made a lot of mistakes. I returned home from Texas. I spilled my guts to my dad about everything that I was doing, everything that I had done, everything that happened to me. And I told him that I accepted Jesus and that I started going to church and that I started reading the Bible. And my dad and I were able to connect about it, because a few years before, he started watching movies about Jesus and historical movies. And that just allowed my father and I to have, or to start building an even deeper relationship, an even deeper connection, where now we don't just have all of our history, him as my dad. We don't just have that now, but we have a connection with God, and we can share that with each other, and we don't have to feel uncomfortable talking about God. And it's incredible. And I've never had a better relationship than I do now with my dad. A few months ago, I was challenged on why I believe in God, why I believe that Jesus is the real deal, and why everything else, every other religion, every other belief, every other philosophy, why those are incorrect, or why those cannot also be true. I was challenged with that. Great questions. And that brought me to a place of, okay, I believe this with all my heart. I had a personal experience with God, no doubt about it. So now I can't just rely on my own personal testimony to bring other people to God. Other people are going to say, well, my suffering was different than yours, Jen. So, he didn't reach me in that dark pit. Some may say that. But at the end of the day, it's not just having a personal encounter with God that makes God real. So, what does that mean? Now I have my relationship with God, my personal encounter with God. That's on the list, right? That's on the books. Next, there are people that do research on the historical evidence, the proof for the God of the Bible. A few of my favorites are Dr. Frank Turek, who runs Cross-Examined, where they have debates, questions and answers, where to find evidence, all of the research that's been done up to this point. All of that presented to you in a unbiased, very direct, logical way. Another one of my favorites is J. Warner Wallace, who is a detective from Los Angeles, California, and he uses his over 20 years of experience to look at God from a forensic perspective. And that means that all of the evidence that makes a case true or false or guilty or not guilty or in favor of or not in favor of, all of these court cases have standards that meet this evidential rule for, is this considered evidence or is this not admissible? So J. Warner Wallace released Forensic Faith, which actually teaches us that there are so many ways to approach the fact that God is real and where to get answers to these tough questions for people that they want proof. So my goal here is to say to you, I've gone through an emotional and mental landslide before I asked God into my heart. Today, again, I am not perfect. However, I am full of peace that no matter what happens, I cannot be broken because I do not rely on myself anymore. I rely on God. On this channel, my goal is not only to spread the gospel, but to also point out what is happening in our world today that is completely against the Bible, which will show us how hard the adversary, which I'm sure you know what the adversary is, how hard the adversary is working to stop God's plans to promote life and holiness. So I really hope that you decide to stick around and see what more is going on in this world that we can look at from a biblical perspective. I don't want us to forget about Jesus. I don't want us to think that Jesus is only an Easter and Christmas holiday. There is so much more to Jesus, to what he was asking of the people, what he's asking of us, the law that's written on our hearts. We already know. And I'm also going to show you how you actually agree with everything that Jesus stood for. Thanks again for clicking and sticking around this long. I'm going to take a line from a friend. If you hung on this long, you're the real MVP. So with that, I'll see you next time. God bless you all.